Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Jeff Gerber and I'm coming to you live from sunny Denver, Colorado. I'd like to welcome you to another session of Adapt Live. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about addressing metabolic health and cardiovascular disease in the doctor's office. So first, a little bit of background. I've been a doctor for over 28 years now, quite a long time. And as you know, most doctors don't learn a lot about nutrition. And this is definitely true. I can tell you when I started medical school back in 1982, that was indeed the case. But here's the rub. What I really enjoyed in medical school was we spent a lot of time learning about physiology, biochemistry, and atherosclerosis and heart disease. We learned about insulin metabolism, not only that insulin regulated blood glucose, but it was also a hormone that regulated energy throughout the body. We learned about how the energy was utilized in the mitochondria through the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, the TCH cycle. There's different names for it. And we even learned about the inflammatory component of cardiovascular disease. I remember studying a 19th century pathologist, the work of Rudy Virchow. So we had all this wonderful science in our pocket, and then came the 2 hours of nutrition. And they said, essentially, put that all aside. The main focus is that we need to worry about cholesterol. They called it, air quotes, the bad cholesterol, and we need to do everything we can to lower the cholesterol. And that is by eating a low-fat diet that tended to be low in calories, and to eat less and to exercise more. Okay, and that was the advice. And I can tell you now, since I've done my own studies over the years, that singular focus on lowering cholesterol has made us fat and sick. And it's taken me a couple years to understand that. So back then in medical school, and in my first 10 years of training, there was this disconnect between the science and the nutrition. The focus was low-fat, low-calorie diets, vegetarian diets to lower cholesterol. And when you went and actually looked at the mechanisms, there weren't mechanisms. It was basically just advice and a concern about high cholesterol. Now, we want to put the blame on Ansel Keys back in the 1950s for this, but I can really tell you that perhaps he started the ball rolling, but really the heart institutions and the governments around the world took on this advice to simply focus on cholesterol. And the problem with this focus, oh, and I should tell you also that this was so much an experiment that even in the 1970s, Philip Handler, who was the previous president of the Natural Sciences, I believe it was called, had said that it was a vast nutritional experiment for which there was no basis. And over the years, we basically have demonstrated that this advice has not worked. We've actually seen the trends in obesity, diabetes, and heart disease on the rise. In fact, in 2016, just last year, the American Heart Association came out with a statement that the prevalence of heart disease is on a rise at a rate much faster than they anticipate. And by 2035, almost half the patients will have some form of heart disease. And yet they don't know what to do with it. And so in my studies over the years, about 20 years ago, I wanted to understand if there was a way to connect diabetes, heart disease, chronic metabolic disease. And I started to read the works of Dr. Jerry Reven. And he painted a picture that really put together metabolic disease, defining a root cause, namely insulin resistance, what we now call the insulin resistance syndrome, that many of our chronic diseases were indeed related to chronic metabolic derangement. And one of the master hormones, insulin, really tells the story. And later I learned about Joseph Kraft, who we refer to as the father of the insulin assay. And throughout his career, he also discovered that insulin was a huge problem. In fact, he estimates that 2/3 of the population probably have an insulin issue. And if you want to diagnose insulin resistance syndrome, hyperinsulinemia, one of the better tests to do is the insulin assay, or at least to think about insulin. Now, just I think a year or two ago, in the U.S. there was a study where they predicted approximately half of the population in the U.S. is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Now, Dr. Kraft would agree with that, but he said if you did proper measures such as insulin, it would be revealing that there was more of a problem. And so both Dr. Reven and Dr. Kraft really put this together, and to recognize that hormonal dysregulation is not only related to diabetes, also heart disease and many other diseases that we see in modern society. In fact, Dr. Kraft said that those with cardiovascular disease not identified as diabetic are simply undiagnosed. And again, he's just stating that those with cardiovascular disease essentially have a metabolic defect. Now, why hasn't this gained steam over the years? Well, Dr. Raven was very outspoken, and most healthcare professionals do know about the work of Dr. Raven. But they didn't know what to do with it. And Dr. Kraft, I had the opportunity to meet him at the tender age of 95 before he passed away last year at 96. He was a very quiet researcher and not as outspoken, but his work was just as profound as Dr. Raven. But what they realized is that the way to address metabolic disease and hormonal dysregulation, it's a nutritional approach. The food becomes the medicine, and it changes the approach to the diet. Specifically, you want to look at foods that address metabolic disease. And the foods that drive insulin and glucose high seem to be the problem. And so this changes the nutritional advice, number one. But number two, how are you going to tell doctors to talk to patients about nutrition? This is the advice that we're trying to share not only with our patients today and with other healthcare professionals, because it's an initiative that really isn't driven by industry and big pharma. So that's really what we're up against. But in terms of proper prevention, I've come to realize now in almost 30 years that this is the approach. This is how we want to help our patients to stay healthy, to optimize their health, to have a long life. And how are we going to share that message with our patients? Well, we wrote a book. And I have to tell you, about 4 years ago, my engineer colleague, Ivor Cummins, came along into the picture, and he started to publish some YouTube videos about his own research into his personal health. And what I found fascinating is he was talking about the same exact stuff that I was talking about. And back then I said, we need to work together and to share this message with individuals. And so this has been a 4-year project in the making. And I'm really excited today because 2 hours ago, this just showed up in the mail. This is my first copy of our book, Eat Rich, Live Long. And this will be widely available February 27th, and you can pre-order it now. And so the title's a little bit provocative. I might go through a couple of pages in the book, but I would say I'm very proud of it. And again, the title is provocative. What exactly does it mean? Can we eat foods that we previously thought were not healthy for us? Well, the idea is that we're trying to teach people about addressing metabolic disease, eating ancestral nutrient-dense foods. And that's the message in the book here. And so there's a couple of parts that I'd like to briefly talk about. I can jump to a couple of pages here. And first I'll show you there's a couple of wonderful recipes. When we're talking about eating nutrient-dense foods, thanks to Chef Ryan Turner, who has helped to contribute, we have 50 beautiful low-carb recipes. And this is a recipe of liver. I know most of you don't like liver. That's kind of a challenge food, but that really describes what a nutrient-dense food is. We have, again, 50 beautiful recipes. Here's another savory recipe with fish and squid. So it just goes on and on. And if we jump to chapter 6, page 72, this is really the solution section. And these are what we call 10 steps or rules in terms of proper nutrition. And just briefly to go through them, the first 3 rules are elimination. And so the idea to reduce or even eliminate the unhealthy carbohydrates in the diet, the sugars, the grains, the starches, and depending on your body type, we discuss the spectrum of low-carb keto and even paleo types of diets. The carbohydrate intake varies. A ketogenic diet perhaps is under 40 grams, low carb under 80, and nobody should be eating over 120 grams of carbs a day. But those seems to be the carbohydrate seems to be the main factor that, again, drives insulin. We want to eliminate the industrial vegetable oils, canola, corn, and soy, which are interesting. They are the polyunsaturated fats that we've been recommended to consume for over 50 years because they lower that so-called bad cholesterol. But now what we realize is they increase inflammation. And also to restrict processed food, which contains carbs and industrial vegetable oils. And so the foods we want to bring back in, again, nutrient-dense foods, slow-burning carbohydrates, fibrous green leafy vegetables, salads are good. They serve as a vehicle to add fat back. You can use oils and fats in the vegetables and the salads. Nutrient-dense sources of protein, ancestral sources, high-quality sources of protein. Again, protein content will vary based on your age, your sex, your activity. And again, eating healthy fats. So it turns out that monounsaturated fats, saturated fats, are metabolically stable in the body. And they control appetite. They don't drive heart disease. Now, we say that when you change this type of diet, cholesterol can change, but it's actually the quality of the cholesterol. It's not necessarily the quantity. Now, we still worry about the quantity of bad cholesterol, especially in patients who can't make lifestyle modifications. So that's something you need to consider. Now, Rule 7, if you're doing everything right, this will naturally control appetite, and you just will eat less frequently. So skipping meals, meal skipping, we think that's good advice as well. Vitamins and supplements are another important area that we discuss in the book. Being mindful of your lifestyle. So stress, sleep, sunlight are all important. In fact, if you don't address those issues, you're going to struggle. And then the last part is activity, movement and activity. And it's not that we're trying to balance the energy equation. We're just simply telling patients and individuals that there's benefit to exercise, heart, cardiovascular, diabetes. It may help to maintain weight, but we think it's an important component of healthy living. And it's not that you have to do it every day, perhaps 2 or 3 times a week. So those are the 10 steps in the book. Now, my favorite figure in the book is on page 108. And this talks briefly about the 4 body types. And I don't know if I have too much time to go into it, but on this side of the screen we have the insulin sensitive, and on the other side we have the insulin resistant. And it's actually the insulin sensitive patients that are interesting. So we have insulin sensitive, slim, and these are generally healthy people. And they're metabolically flexible. They can tolerate more carbs. They still want to focus on healthy eating and living, but when you do all their measurements, you see that they're pretty healthy. And then we have the insulin sensitive, overweight individuals. Now, when you do all the proper measurements, which, by the way, include inflammatory markers, fasting insulin, CRP, maybe ferritin, GGT, liver function testing, lipid profile, but we look at that a little bit differently. Again, we're looking at the quality as measured by the ratios. You can do HOMO with insulin versus glucose as a fasting, and then we wish more healthcare professionals would regain an interest in glucose tolerance tests, both with and without insulin. So these are the types of tests, and so when you have these insulin sensitive overweight individuals, metabolically they're pretty healthy, and so they have this great propensity to store healthy subcutaneous fat. And so they're kind of a challenge, and in the book we talk about how you deal with these people so they can easily get into ketosis. But the point is, they have to focus on the quantity of the food, actually. And once they're into, say, a ketogenic state, and there's different ways to get there, they actually decrease the fat intake. Now, on the outside, it's more of a low-fat and a low-carb diet, but inside, this is enabling them to tap into their stored energy in their own body fat, and then they begin to have success. But guess what? You have to think about food quantity. And then we have the insulin resistant thin individuals or slim individuals, and we refer to them as the TOFI. They're thin on the outside, fat on the inside, and we see a lot of Asian individuals like this. And they're still metabolically unhealthy when you measure them. Now, they may think they're healthy, but when you do the measurements, we see these thin people come in and they're full-blown diabetic. And then, of course, we have the insulin-resistant overweight, and they need to pull all 10 of those triggers on the rules. And so this is a bit unique in the book, and I think you'll find it rather interesting. There's a ton of science in here, thanks to my engineering colleague, Ivor. And so he spent a career as a chemical engineer doing complex problem solving. And you're going to see that come out in the book. And it's really unique because we have the combination of the doctor and the engineer hacking health. And so I think this is a great read. And I hope you pick up a copy. It'll be available February 27th. You can pre-purchase it on Amazon. Again, Eat Rich, Live Long. And so lastly, I just want to mention we have a big conference coming up, Low Carb Breckenridge 2018. Again, this is another effort on my part to share information with the general public, researchers, scientists, and healthcare professionals. I'm happy to report that this week we submitted application for CME, and we were approved for 18 CME credits. And this is a great way to attract healthcare professionals. And so I'm busy seeing patients in the office. I'm busy writing books. I'm busy with the medical conference, but this is my passion now, to share this information with others in any way that I can. So there's still time to register to come to the beautiful Rocky Mountains of Colorado to enjoy the conference. If you can't make it or it's too costly for you, we have a live stream that's available. But we do want to make this information accessible to everyone. So that's all I have, and I hope you enjoyed my Adapt Live session. And if you enjoy this, please subscribe. So thank you and have a great weekend. We'll see you soon. Bye.